controversial stuff on here. Oh, here we go.
Councilmember Holman?
Here.
Councilmember Schmidt?
Here.
Councilmember Wolbach?
Here.
4 present.
Very good. Cool. So first order of business is board communications. And members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda. Are there any members of the public? If no members of the public, let's proceed to action items. Let's see. Mr. Perez, you have the floor.
I'm actually going to turn over to Sherry Nixon to go ahead and start her item.
Okay. Members of the committee, my name is Sherry Nixon. I'm with the Planning and Community Environment Department. We're coming to you tonight requesting a recommendation for amendments to the municipal code, which will update and standardize the collection of impact fees. Generally speaking, impact fees have been adopted by council as the need has arisen, and the new municipal code, I don't know why I'm having trouble saying that tonight, municipal code has been introduced at the time when the impact fees were introduced. An unintended consequence has been an overly complicated process to administer these funds. So we're coming to you tonight, we have several objectives. So the purpose of the recommended changes we're going to bring to you are to provide uniformity amongst rate calculations, to provide uniformity amongst the fees for inflationary adjustments, and let me touch a little bit on that. Right now, the uniformity amongst rate calculations, some are based on the date of entitlement, some are based on other dates. Uniformity amongst the fees for inflationary adjustments, some are CPI, some are other factors at different times. We want to improve the administration of these funds and create uniform payment timing so that they all are due at similar times. And to clarify some ambiguous language, like we've got some language about Quimby versus Parks fees, and to implement uniform protest procedures per the Mitigation Fee Act. As mentioned earlier, impact fees were often established with their own code, which may have made sense at the time, but they sometimes included requirements for certain city positions to update fees, report on funds, or have the ability to issue citations. Some of those titles, as we know, have changed, the positions have changed, and so part of what we're doing asking you to recommend tonight is to kind of update the code so it makes sense for the way that we do business today. There are also some out-of-date payment locations in the code. I think we have one code that says pay your fees and transportation division. It just isn't really where we collect funds. So staff is recommending changes to the code. I'm sorry, I'm staying behind here. Staff is recommending changes to the code that will standardize the inflation process and index across the funds as much as possible, fees as much as possible. Standardize the due dates of fee payments, update or remove position titles where it's appropriate, to implement the parking fund, some of the parking fund audit recommendations to make it easier to administer, to correct these unintended errors that are in the code, and to add the protest information. Wish of our mouse. Oops. Well, it's not going.
You might be able to use
Oh, there we go. So the next steps would be asking the Finance Committee for the recommendations, and if recommended, we'd like to continue to council and conduct a public hearing, and then the new adjustments to these fees would be effective July 2017 with the mini fee schedules updates. And with that, we're open to questions.
Super. So why don't we first take, let's see, why don't we first take questions from the public, if there are any, and then do both comments and questions at the same time from the committee. So we're on action item 1. Are there any comments from the public on action item 1? With no public comments, let's do council comments and questions. Councilmember Wolbach.
I was just hoping to hear maybe a little bit more narrative about how we got through this process to this point. Was anyone from any of the communities that this will be most directly impacted by this? Were they involved in the conversation? Was it staff led? how long have you guys been working on this? Just wanted to get a sense of what's gone into the project so far.
We've actually been working on this for quite some time, and at the same time, then the parking fund audit kind of came parallel, and they just happened to happen at the same time. And what we were trying to do was make it easier to administer these funds by putting them in, we've been trying to program them to our Excel permitting system so that, you know, it just goes smoothly. Right now, it's a rather complicated process. So we started that project some time ago, but as we started doing the programming with Excel, we realized how very complicated the programming was, and realized that, you know, if we want to be effective at this, and we want to, you know, have copies that are kept in Excel and be able to track and chime in anytime, correct me if I'm wrong. We started looking at some of these and saying, you know, this would be a lot easier for the public to understand and for us to administer if they were lined up, because right now it's hard for somebody to understand why one fee has one, the rates are calculated based on one date and another has another date. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering also, for those who would be, you know, paying these fees, have you done any communication with them, orally or even just informally, to hear, you know, their thoughts about this, or have you guys heard complaints over the years that this is partially responding to, or is this really more about making the process easier for internally?
It really is really more about making the process easier internally and making sure it's auditable very clearly and cleanly. We don't really expect it to affect the budget because we're not changing the amounts of the fees. We're just lining up the processes every year. For instance, when we update them, not every fee, but many of the fees have different processes for that. So kind of lining them up. We haven't heard complaints about it, but we want to make sure that we can explain them to people if they do have questions, and that it's something the average person can clearly understand.
Great, thank you.
Go after Greg.
Councilmember Schmidt, do you have any questions?
Well, one question. It looks very straightforward. You're just cleaning up a code with a little bit of impetus from the auditor, and it looks very straightforward. But I have mucked around a little bit on downtown parking and came across some striking things. In 1986, there's a land use and transportation studies on the basis of a lot of what we're doing. And they talked about in lieu fees. And it said the in lieu provision is to be enforced only at such times as there are designated surplus spaces in the new parking structures. The payment of an in lieu parking is never permitted in the absence of available public parking supply. Now, the actual in lieu fee was done in a 1995 ordinance, and that ordinance noted the planning director shall assure that any development on the site shall not result in a net reduction of parking spaces provided. Now, is that part of our in lieu fee, and is it enforced?
So, Carissa, Senior Assistant City Attorney. One thing we did want to distinguish when, as we're rolling out this particular cleanup ordinance, is that when we started going through the code to really codify these cleanup items, we noticed that there is going to be a further need to do some substantive revision to the fee structure. So we started to do some of that, and then it became a more complex project, and we really wanted to just proceed with these cleanup items first. So I recognize that there are a series of policy decisions that need to be made in connection with the transportation impact fee and frankly with some of your other fees. But this effort does not attempt to get into those policy discussions.
Okay, but I do note as a council member that every so often that issue comes to council,
Yes.
and I guess before the next one comes up, I hope there's a clarification, but you tend to imply that that still is sitting in the code. That's
Yes.
statement. Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Holman.
So thanks for the question, Greg. So we do have fees and we have penalties. And we've talked about both. When are the penalties scheduled to come? Because we have especially one project that's been talked about a lot and continues to be talked about a lot. For instance, when are the penalty fees coming forward?
Those are coming in October, I believe, and I'm not sure if they come directly to the city council or if they come first to finance committee, but I know that there is an October item on the penalty schedule, and we are recommending 2 increased penalties to address in part the issue that you're referring to.
Okay. And then, I guess because the ordinance, I only had time to like scan it, I do apologize for that, but the ordinance, help me understand, it's like, does the ordinance address really if someone doesn't pay the fee yet, or they're like, well, we'll get you the fee within blah, 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 but we, don't have it for you yet, but we'll have it to you by Tuesday, give us the demolition permit today. So what kind of, and it sounds like a silly question, but I'm not, it's not a silly question, because there are relationships. There are relationships, and so I want to know, like, what is the rigidity of this and the enforcement that staff will say, we have the money in hand before you get your, let's say, building permit?
So actually, my understanding of the genesis of this, and the impetus really is from Sherry's group, and is that that's exactly what we want to do, is that, right now, Excella is not programmed in a way where we can actually delay issuance of a building permit because a fee hasn't been paid. And so when Sherry's group started looking at this and trying to program Excella to do this, we recognized that actually the code needed to be amended to clarify the timing of the payment of the fee. So hopefully once we get this code amendment in place, the programming piece is proceeding on a parallel track. We'll be able to integrate those two, and we'll have much better quality control on that issue.
If I might add, I wasn't smiling because it was silly at all. I was smiling because you were saying exactly what we had been thinking. And the whole purpose, as Cara said, the whole thing that kind of started this is we have the Excella permitting system, but the fees have been operating separate and aside and apart. We're trying to put them together so the fee has to be paid, and it's right there in the system for people to see before the permit is issued. So it's a check and balance that we're striving for, and that's part of trying to make it easier to administer.
So I'm going to ask another slice and dice question, which is, and I'm not in favor of this, but the practice that's been developed by staff over the last, couple of years or so, is when somebody has a project, demolition permits, not for residential, single-family residential, but demolition permits are granted before the building permit is. And so when is the fee going to be collected? And I personally, frankly, I'll just say, I don't think we ought to be granting demolition permits before building permits are granted. But we're doing that. So for now or any time in the future, if that happens to be the sequence or continues to be the sequence, when are fees collected?
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Cara, but the code reads that the issuance of the first building permit, and if it's phased, the first phase, the fees would be collected for that phase. So it's the issuance of the building permit right now.
So that doesn't address demolition permits at all then?
Yeah, I don't think the old code talked about that either. Well, in the case when there was no building permit, it would be a change of use permit. A change of use was what would trigger it, and still does.
So can we raise to the council then the question about demolition permits as compared to building permits?
Right. So
Seems like we should.
Right. Again, these are all integrated issues, I recognize, but we are trying to just bring this piece forward separately. actually, Director Gittleman and I are working on a separate ordinance that will address the building permit, demolition permit issue. That's another set of cleanup ordinance changes that we're working on. So I think that, is a better place to raise that issue. Currently, right now, where you can get a demolition permit before a building permit, it wouldn't make sense to pay impact fees if you don't know what you're building. So.
Well, they know what they're building, it's just they haven't gotten the final permits. Applicants have a pretty darn good idea of what they're building, because.
Right, but it
It's still
hasn't been
subject to the
entitled.
city's approval, right?
Yeah,
The fees depend on what exactly you're doing, too.
Yeah.
yeah.
And I have one other question, if I can. Oh, yeah. And I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Looking to the city attorney there. So, especially with parking in lieu fees, I mean, some of these fees are like, less popular than others. Let's just pick on one that's not that popular. Parking in lieu fees. And same thing would be with housing in lieu fees. The moment we collect them, they're inadequate. So, can we put an escalating factor on the impact fees at all, or of any amount, any percentage, any anticipated, where I'm going, into the fee that's being collected?
Right. Well, I will say, according to the New York Times article of this weekend, that we have the highest in lieu parking fees in the nation, but.
We also have one of the highest real estate costs too, so let's.
Yes. So, you can't build in an undeterminate escalator. We have built in an inflation adjuster, but that only applies,
Going forward.
Right.
So there's no way to address that matter that you can
Not that I'm-
creatively come up with?
Right, right. Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I think those are my questions.
That's funny, because I thought the whole thing by and large seemed perfectly logical and cut and dried and sensible. Good you guys are doing it. But the one place I gravitated to was exactly the same place you did, which was the parking and lieu fees, right? So, and maybe this is sort of the same question asked from a different angle, but it looks to me like this number of $30,250 for 250 square feet is sort of hard-coded into the code. What does that, so if I put up a new building, and it's got 250 square feet in it, and so I pay $30,250, what does that money go to? Where does it go? What's it used for? And it's earmarked for something, right?
The parking in lieu specifically. So right now it's being set aside, and with the council on hold
Right.
on the proceeding on the building of a garage.
Right, okay, so it's allocated towards a garage, because obviously there's no more parking spaces today, so we're hanging on to it for when we build a garage.
Correct.
And then if I understand the code, what it says here, we're gonna get out a couple of years, and we're gonna look at what it actually costs to go build a garage. And then we're gonna adjust this number based on what it really costs. Did I understand that right?
Because it was said by the cost of the prior two garages.
Right.
So any additions to that would be part of the formula in the calculation.
So then we're gonna get out a few years, and maybe the numbers just aren't big enough to matter, right? But we're gonna get out 3 years or something like that. We're gonna build a garage, and we're going, you know what? The right number is $40,000 for 250 square feet, for example. So we're not gonna go back and say, well, you paid us $30,000 like a couple of years ago, but now you gotta pay us another $10,000. We're not gonna do that, right?
I don't think you can do that, can you?
Which is sort of the question that you asked, I think, which was, should it be adjusted by construction?
Anticipated construction date.
construction dates, right? Did you guys look at that issue at all?
Not for this process, because at this process, we were looking at more on the administrative side versus the policy decisions itself. In regards to some policy, we could say that would be what escalator and the timing Those are probably the policies that we're looking at. It's more of a trying to make it more understandable and easier to establish and administer.
I understand.
But they do all have some sort of annual inflationary adjustment.
But it's not in line to.
But the code says $30,250,
But
right?
it also annually adjusts.
Does it say that in there? And I missed it?
Yeah.
So it's currently 60,000. This is the old code language that was adopted in the
Okay.
80s.
It's been upped
Yeah.
every year.
It's
like 65
based on
or
the
something.
last review with the review with the auditors and 67,000 something.
I have another question. I didn't get to.
Okay, so I didn't understand that from.
So they're getting
the code.
rich.
So they're really doing it. Councilmember Wolbeck, do you have a quick follow-on question on this?
Well, it sounds actually like Councilmember Holman did as well, so I'd be happy.
I think you were first.
Okay. Well, Jerry, didn't wait for your further. I'm not sure this is the right time to go deep into this conversation, but since we're having it, I'll just say I think it would be really inappropriate, whether we're talking about a commercial developer or somebody remodeling their home or whoever. I think it would be very inappropriate to charge them dependent on when we think we're going to spend their money. I think that would be morally wrong and probably illegal. So I hope we don't go down that path. You know, if somebody's paying a fee to the city and we say we're going to use this fee 10 years from now, you have to charge us based on how much bang for the buck we're going to get in 10 years. I mean, that's up to us when we spend the money that they give us. That's not something we should punish them for if we're slow on, you know, turning that around into whatever it is we're using it for. And I would apply that philosophy across the board for anybody who's paying any fee to the city for whatever purpose we're spending it on. So I just want to put that out there. And when we're ready for motions, I'll be happy to move the staff recommendation.
Councilmember.
So just, I appreciate the sentiment. At the same time, an impact fee is to cover the cost of providing, you know, something that mitigates the impact. So I don't think it's irrational to think that, you know, there might be an escalating factor charged based on when we anticipate. So it's not an argument we're going to have, though, because it sounds like it's illegal. I have.
Well, if you put your own parking space in, you don't have to pay the fee, right?
That's exactly
So
right,
that's the point.
which we should be encouraging. But the calculation of the parking in lieu fee, it's construction cost, design construction cost of the most recent parking structure. That's what it's based on. And if the parking garage is constructed, then the new ordinance allows for that cost to be amended plus the cost of bond funding. The problem is that the last parking garage we built was what, 12 years ago, 14 years ago?
Yeah, that's about right.
So why would we use 14-year-ago pricing?
Well, adjusted.
Well, is it adjusted? I'm just reading this
It is
one
adjusted
paragraph on
annually.
you.
It's adjusted annually by the change in the construction cost index for the San Francisco Bay Area.
Which makes sense.
Okay, that makes me feel better. It's just not how I read this.
Yeah, no, there's
Yeah,
another
that-
section that has to do with how all the fees are adjusted every
Okay,
year.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it's not all connected.
yeah. No, I caught that there was an escalating factor, but this seemed to kind of fly in the face of that, so, okay.
And let's think for a second how much we're talking about. We're just looking at commercial. It's 50,000 square foot a year. And you say we're at $67,000 or something like that. So at 30,000, we're at $120 a square foot. So that means we're at, you know, $250 a square foot or something like that. So 50,000 square feet times 250 is if we're off by 10%, I guess how much money is, it's not that much, is it? It's in a couple 100,000 or something like that, right? Is it order of magnitude
I think so.
if we're off?
That's why he's the chair.
Usually wrong, but never, yeah. Okay, all right, so I didn't have any other questions, that was my further comments and questions on this from
No, I guess
council
that's it.
side?
Guess that's it.
Councilmember Wolbeck, did you want to make a motion?
Yeah, I'd be happy to move the staff recommendation.
Second. Comment on the motion?
Thank you, staff, for great work on this. And I look forward to those other items that were alluded to coming forward in due time.
And Sounds great. All in favor?
What?
Oh, did you have a question, comment? Sorry.
Comment. Yeah, I wonder if we could, at the end of the meeting, add on to our finance committee items,
Mhm.
a discussion of some of the issues that have been brought up about the rest of the department. You said there's work going on to look at it, so it might be good to have a discussion in the finance committee. So just to add that too.
Would you be all right with sort of doing that in the discussion of future agenda item?
Yeah, and
Or
then-
should we do it now?
I think it'd be appropriate at the end, and then we'll take that back to the city manager and discussion with the mayor and
Yeah, I'm happy.
return it back.
I just wanted to bring it up in connection.
Okay. No further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. With that, we'll proceed to the Staff and Utility UAC recommendation regarding the disposition of revenues from carbon.
No carbon fuel standard.
Carbon credit, but it's cap and trade credits.
Well, not exactly.
Terrence?
What's that? Oh, your computer? You need a stick? In fact, you can use one.
Full disclosure here, the Rummy's my next door neighbor.
Yeah, he's been a great neighbor for 16 plus years.
Welcome.
It's not easy. This is actually credits generated by sale of natural gas within our jurisdiction. No? Got it wrong? Okay, try again. Credits generated by.
Partly, I mean, you got it partly right, but there's two parts of it.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Jane Ratchey, Assistant Director of Utilities. I have Hiram McKelty with me who helped develop this program. And so I'm just going to quickly go through the slides and try to get to your questions. I'm actually a substitute presenter tonight. The program manager is actually at a meeting elsewhere. So first we'll go over what is the low carbon fuel standard. What is this regulation? This is actually should be good news and a happy story here and hopefully non-controversial. This is kind of free money to us, and the decision here is a policy on how to spend these revenues that we get. So I'll explain what the regulations, the value of the credits generated, and we are generating them both for electric vehicles, EVs, and for compressed natural gas vehicles, CNG vehicles. And then I'm going to go over what we will be asking council to approve the program on how we spend the revenues. And you've seen some of this before at the council. The council approved a template for selling our low carbon fuel standard credits already, so that we can monetize these credits that we do receive. And then we'll go into the timeline. So there is a state goal to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels by 10% by 2020. And this is a program that the California Air Resources Board developed to try to achieve that goal. And so transportation fuel companies are required to try to reduce the carbon intensity somehow of their fuel. And they're going to do it either by trying to get more efficient processes to extract and refine the fossil fuel. They're going to try to make the actual fuel they deliver have less carbon intensity by mixing in something that has a lower carbon intensity to it. Or they will buy these low carbon fuel standard credits from somebody like us. So these are allocated to
us at no cost, or to providers of low carbon intense fuels. And, you know, compressed natural gas is a low carbon intensity fuel, and so is electricity. So we get a certain amount of these credits, and they're granted to us based on how many electric vehicles are in Palo Alto, and we know that because the DMV tells us how many there are. It doesn't tell us where they are exactly, but we know how many there are. And so we have agreed with the CARB, the California Air Resources Board, of a formula for each EV in town. You get a certain number of credits. And also we get additional credits for electricity that is delivered at EV charging stations that the city owns. And so that's based on how many kilowatt hours are delivered of our energy. Unfortunately, we only get to use the California average carbon intensity of the electricity. They wouldn't let us get even more credits because we're carbon neutral electricity. We tried that.
Actually, I wanted to ask that. So
Yeah,
it
we
doesn't
didn't-
matter, even if we were generating our electricity from coal, it would be the same number of.
Yes, yeah. It's,
So they're really crediting EVs, not renewable energy.
right. Yeah, we made an argument there, and it didn't go anywhere.
Thanks for trying.
Also, and so the value of it is how many credits we have and what the market value of the credits are. And the market value, I'll show a chart here later, has been very volatile. But just a few facts and figures. So as of March 2016, we had 1,300 EVs registered in Palo Alto. We project that number is going to increase a lot in the future. So right now, the value of the credits is, we think this number of $500,000 might actually be a bit high for 2016, just because the value of the credits have actually dropped lately. So we may not get that much money. But with additional EVs in town, we do expect this to be a substantial revenue source. And so that's why we need a policy. How can you spend it? But we can't spend it on anything we want. The regulations are very clear on how you can spend it. And I guess I don't have that in the presentation, but it has to be effectively to the benefit of EV owners. That's the primary consideration for the EV parts. And for the CNG vehicles, it's effectively the same thing, to the benefit of them.
And nobody wants to just give them a rebate.
What?
And nobody wants to just give them a rebate.
Well, that's what PG&E is doing,
PG&E is
and that
doing
is an
it.
option.
The easy option.
It's very easy, it's very direct, it definitely benefits the EV owners. PG&E has something like, just give them $500 a one-time amount. But we kind of felt, we have got this money, we can maybe try to get an incentive for new people to get new EVs and try to expand the EVs in town. So we didn't propose that, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So this chart shows, the blue bars shows what the volume of the transactions in this market have been. And so it's, the volume has picked up a bit. The bars are two different sort of market measurements of where these, the value of these LCFS, the low carbon fuel standard credits, have been. When we began this, we signed up for this program in early 2014, and we were looking at a price around $50 a credit. And then we saw them go way up. In fact, I was looking here in the report, it says the prevailing price is $116 a credit. Well, it has gone down since in August, it's now $80. So the amount we get is going to be variable. So this just to show you that the program we're proposing has different options, and it has sort of delegates to the city manager exactly for that year how the money would be spent. And so the policy is You can spend it in these areas, and then the city manager will determine, okay, well, this is how much money we actually got, and there's interest in this part and not that part, and this is how the money will be spent. We'll try to spend it this year. So we looked at a lot of different options, including some things that look reasonable for now and some things that are maybe not great at the moment, but we still included them in the program, and we may want to implement those in the future. And let me go through the kind of the reverse of this slide. The ones that we're looking at for the near term and the initial year of the program will be rebates for the installation of EVSE, that's electric vehicle supply equipment, that's basically chargers. And the other idea was to try to, for people with electric vehicles, when they, because we have a tiered rate structure, they're adding new electric load, often they'll be bumped into the second tier, or all the energy that they use to charge their car will be in the second tier. So is there a way for us to use this money to provide a discount or subsidy somehow for the electric costs associated with charging their EVs? So that's one idea. We have a pilot time of use program, and we could expand that. A lot of the EV owners are on that time of use rate program, and we may be able to use these funds to further discount the off-peak price and use the money that way. Of course, our rates have to be compliant with Prop 26 and based on the cost of service, but we can these are additional funds beyond that that can be used to provide that subsidy. Also, there's another, if EV owners are willing to share with us information about how their EVs are being used, and perhaps we could communicate with them and tell them, please charge now or don't charge now, and we can optimize and maybe use that for a demand response program in the future, or somehow a grid interactive type of information. We sort of provide an incentive for people to share that data with us. And finally, and this is a component of the regulation, they want us to spend money or to provide education and outreach programs around EVs. And so there is work to be done in that area to try to make sure people understand everything about EVs and their value and their cost and how easy it is to connect in Palo Alto. Other ideas that we have discarded for the first year of the program but are part of the policy and may be implemented in the future are to discount development center permit fees. That turned out to be just administratively difficult, and so we're not proposing that at the moment. Providing cash rebates, that's a very, there is some administrative headache with that of finding exactly the guy and who owns it, and are they a utility customer, or is it on the utility bill, and we cut them a check. Also, it felt like it's probably not, that guy didn't buy an EV because he was expecting to get a $500 check from the utility. So it probably didn't really influence his decision to buy an EV. So that idea of the cash rebate did not get very good support at all from the UAC. They thought that the money could be better spent on these other programs that we proposed. And the other idea is providing free charging at the public EV charging stations. And we actually think that's not a very good idea, because it kind of makes people will just use the free chargers for free, and they'll clog them up, and they aren't available. And what our point is to try to have chargers available for people, and actually by charging money to charge, that actually makes a lot more chargers available to people, and that's what we want. We want people to feel like when they get an EV, there's going to be a spot that they can charge them if they needed to. So we kind of picked the bottom ones there. Whoop, I'm going the wrong way. And I just have a couple slides to show you some projections about where we see EV charging and right now and in the future. This shows that how many EV chargers we expect, or how many EVs we expect of people who live in town and people who commute into town. And we basically, the point of this slide is we see EV charging and EV ownership, both by residents and commuters, growing over time substantially. This is a picture of, the city does own some level 2, and that's a sort of fast charger. And you can see the blue line on the top chart shows how many of these chargers the city owns and over the past several years. And so we don't own that many. It looks like we have 6. And you can see that the red line shows how many how many EVs charge daily per charger. So that's just kind of statistics for you. And then the bottom is how much total electricity is dispensed through the city-owned chargers. And again, that is one way we get additional of these LCFS credits. So based on what we think we will get in terms of just revenue from selling these LCF credits, our initial program is, and there's a lot more detail in the staff report, but this is sort of a summary, that we would provide, first of all, rebates for people putting in chargers, and up to 3 rebates or 3 chargers per address. And we're really, we're really trying to target multifamily dwellings in sort of the underserved area. First, we think that those are more difficult.
So I can talk about the program a little bit. So it's actually a maximum of 6 chargers per service address, because what we're finding is there are all these new types of chargers where it has one pillar with like octopus arms, and those are a lot cheaper to install. So we'd like to see as many chargers as possible. But with EV charging in public places, it's not the cost of the charger itself. Those you can buy, a single one you could buy for $5,000 to maybe $2,000. It's the infrastructure work. So with our program, we have it divided into 2 actually. One for multifamily residences, like Jane said, and those would target apartments, townhouses, condominiums, mixed-use buildings, and commercial buildings. And then the second part of the program would be for the school district, public sector, and nonprofit organizations. And we have 2 separate set of requirements that we think would be a good idea. And for the commercial side, we're saying rebates of up to $3,000 with a maximum of 6 chargers, and we'll pay up to 75% of the total project. So we're imagining we'll be paying mainly for infrastructure costs, but at the end we want proof that they actually that they actually put all the conduits and everything in for an EV charger. So we have to at least be able to see 1 charger there at the end, because some of these projects, they're going to spend over $10,000 just laying all the conduit to make their buildings EV ready. And we have a various set of rules. For example, like in an apartment building, it can't be any parking space dedicated to 1 person. It has to be for a shared parking location. And this is something, talking to a lot of the facility managers and the property managers of apartments and condominiums, they're really struggling with this, because there is a huge demand from their residences asking for EV charging. And the EV charging companies are coming up with a lot of great options on how to charge a fair rate So each person will pay for the electricity they use, but they're not paying for their neighbor charging their car. And so there are a lot of systems that are coming out. We are hoping most people will put in level 2 chargers, like Jane said. Those are the faster ones. The level 3 are the superchargers, like what the Tesla supercharging stations have. Level 2 tends to be the ones that are faster. So you could charge a car in maybe 4 hours. And they use like a dryer, so 220 volt, 240 volt outlet. So it's for each of these places, the big thing is where they're going to install this. So we've also decided we will do a pre-inspection and post-inspection for each site before approving any rebates. And then for the schools and other nonprofit organizations and the public sector, we're thinking rebates of up to $5,000 per EVSE installed, with a maximum of 6 EVSEs. And in this case, the rebates can cover up to 100% of the total installation cost. And the reason for this is, for example, at the schools, the biggest cost is going to be the trenching. Because if you think of a school parking lot or a church parking lot, there isn't electricity right in those larger parking spaces. Whereas in an apartment complex, electricity is pretty close to pole. And so a lot of the cost is going to be getting that infrastructure in place.
So I think a lot of these details that she's talking about are in attachment B of the staff report. So I don't know how much more detail you want, or you're interested in going through these. I kind of already explained when I just lightly before generally what these 5 areas are. So let me just move on. Also, remember we do have the compressed natural gas station that is used by schools and other people with CNG vehicles, including the city. And so we do get some credits for that. The value of this is a lot less than the than the credits for the EVs. This is only maybe $30,000 a year. But we do have a proposed policy for using those funds as well. And there are some improvements that the city is looking at to upgrade that CNG station, and that would be the first area we'd like to devote those funds to. And then if there's extra money after that, we were looking at potentially making that a carbon neutral gas supply for that CNG. And then if there's any extra money after that, actually reducing the rate that's charged for the CNG to make it even more beneficial for CNG drivers. So basically, this is what we're recommending, that you approve the program. We expect this to come back to council in November, and we'd like to start this program in 2017.
Thank you very much. At this point, why don't we see if there are any questions from the public? There's no public questions. Let's move on to council questions and comments. And I think, why don't we ask a round of questions first?
Sure.
Because I have one and you have one, but comments is going to sort of depend on. So, Councilman Brown.
So I had a couple of 3 questions. So 3% now, 6 to 8% by 2020, this is the number of EVs registered, and 30 to 60% by 2030. That's a big range.
Yeah. And a
So
lot of that
these
is
are-
driven by, if we're going to try to meet this 80% by 2030 goal, it's got to be focused on mobility, because that's the biggest part of our greenhouse gas emissions by far.
So that's a need-driven number as opposed to
Well,
a
it's
supply-driven number.
It doesn't really affect the policy in front of you anyway.
You know, it's just a curiosity.
Yeah.
But it is
Yeah,
intended to
it's a-
facilitate that growth.
It's a huge, yeah, it's a huge growth.
Major market shift.
You sort of have access, or Romy, it's like, what are the projections?
Everyone will have at least one EV by 2030. No. I think one of the things is the price, and as prices for EVs comes down, and I recently saw an email saying that there was a lease for like the Chevy Spark for $29 a month, which I looked into for my daughter. I mean, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So I think,
Leaf
like
is
Jane
also
said,
very cheap.
yeah, I do think people will implement them, not just Palo Alto residents, but those commuting into Palo Alto. I think will say, if I can charge at work, I can go with a car that doesn't have a 200-mile range. I do think more people will be driving EVs.
And so another question, which is related but not the same. You said that, when was it that the rate was 116 and now it's 80?
I think within the summer, when we wrote this,
I think
probably it was in June.
July or June.
And it's already gone to 80?
Mhm. Yeah, you can
So-
see the volatility of that.
So, so I guess the question is it volatile or is it going down? I mean, how do we,
We don't,
I mean, I know there's no
I'll
crystal
tell you
ball,
in a year, but, we don't know. I don't know if it's a trend going down, and it's gonna go way down. We didn't see that it was gonna rise. When we started and we saw that they were worth $50, we thought, well, let's still join the program. And then it went up a lot. We thought, wow.
When
this-
did you join?
We joined the program in early 2014. So
it's-
we can't, I don't know if it's going to go back up or if it's going to continue falling
Mhm.
or if it's settling at 80. I don't know.
So is the evaluation of the program going to be like how frequent? Because, we're looking at spending money and there is this volatility or a trend and
But
we don't know which.
we will spend the money after we monetize it. And so we'll get the credits, we'll sell the credits, and then we know how much money we have. And then the next year, we'll sell the next year's credits.
Basically,
Now
on
we
an annual
haven't
cycle.
spent anything. And so we've got all the credits from when we joined the program in 2014.
Mhm.
So we have some money to spend right now.
So it'll be sort of like a regular utility rebate in a way, just to use the term rebate generally and loosely here. So people are going to understand that if the volatility isn't a volatility, it's a trend downwards, then people
We
won't
might
be
have
married
to restrict it at some point and say, we only have, I don't know if we want to reduce the rebate from 3,000 to something less if we have less money, or just say, you really need 3,000 and so we're going to only have one per address or something like that.
Mhm.
But we'll find a way to, implement it. And so each year we'll know how much we have and we'll have to modify the program to meet that budget.
I think to your point, the council member, is that the volatility of the pricing suggests this is not a funding source we want to create more of an ongoing expectation that the money will be there because of the range.
There's a chance this entire program might end.
Mhm.
That's a clear possibility these days when they're, this has come up recently actually, that they might say, oh, this LCFS program, we're done with it. We were anticipating that it would go through 2020 and it may not even do that.
And that's why I was kind of equating it to a utility rebate. It's sort of like, we're out of money for your washer and dryer upgrade. So just wondering if it's kind of sort of.
So for our other rebates that utilities offers, there is always that condition that as long as funds last. And I think that'll be the case with this.
Okay, very good.
Questions? Councilmember Rollback.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Let's see. on page 8 or slide 8, the chart at the top shows the number of level 2 EV chargers that are city-owned in blue, correct?
Mm-hmm. Just 6 now. Yeah,
So we've got,
I
is it,
think
that's 30,
30
right?
on the
Right.
right-hand side,
Oh,
yes.
okay.
Um,
Right.
And I guess I have a couple of questions. One, I can't remember what our plans are to expand that over the next few years. So it was neat to see the projections on the prior page. I was kind of hoping to see a projection on the front, but is that still a policy decision that really is going to come to council? Or
To a certain extent, on Monday, the council will be discussing the EV chargers, solar in city garages. As a part of that project, there is, in conjunction with our private partner, the plan to add 80 additional chargers in the 4 garages.
so we'll be going from 30 to 110. Cool. And the previous line of questioning may have answered my next question, which is, do we want to dedicate some of these funds to that or towards even more expansion? But given that this money is not very dependable, it sounds like we wouldn't want to count on it in order to plan financing infrastructure improvements, including EV chargers. Is that kind of where staff was thinking as well? That it would be risky to count on this as funding coming in, and so we don't want to plan to use this for, because of the proposals presented here by staff, helping fund construction of more city-owned EV chargers was not one of the options, correct?
So I just want to say, like Jane said, there are funds from 2014, 15, and 16. And, right, I think the prices are coming back up again after they dropped quite a bit from that 116 price. And
I think the question is, will the funds be used for city-owned?
city.
Yeah, so let's start with that.
If you look at our attachment B, which is the program, what we're trying to target with this program is the multifamily, the mixed-use, the commercial building, garages, and parking areas. We don't really say we're going to give this money to ourselves, the city. And so we're trying to increase EV charging available where it's kind of in an underserved area now is the first goal, to try to get it beyond. And we are expecting, hopefully, these new chargers that will come along with the solar on the 4 garages too.
Okay, great.
So there's nothing really in here that doesn't allow us to do that, but that wasn't the first place that we were going to concentrate for the first year.
Okay. And then you said up to 6 chargers per address, correct? Would that include, larger, places with a lot of parking, such as big grocery stores, Town Country, or Charleston Shopping, or Midtown, or around Cal Ave, or I guess that's more city-owned, or Stanford Shopping Center, where you have a large, big parking lot, lots of people driving there on private property. Would the cap still be 6?
For now, I think we are thinking 6 per address.
And is that just because we don't want
We have
a
limited
single
funds.
employer to tap out?
We
all
want
of
to
it?
spread it
Right.
out
Yeah.
across
Right.
the city as much as possible. If Stanford Shopping Center, or let's say Tesla says we
Yeah.
want to put in a bunch of chargers,
They could drain the whole
we
fund
can't
pretty
say
fast.
no, but, right,
If we didn't have that cap,
right. So
they could
we want to spread it out as much as
right,
possible.
and we don't want anyone to monopolize the funds,
Yes.
so that makes sense.
I think also part of the rationale here is, as Jane pointed out, the untapped market, or perhaps another way of saying it is, it's the seed market that we see as key to the future growth of the EV, volume within Palo Alto. So the area, in particular, the multifamily developments, because of the duration of the parking, that also being consistent with the ability to charge versus, let's say, grocery store where the stay would be relatively short, as one of the key growth areas to meeting our sustainability climate action plan goals.
Right. And then on slide 10, we're talking about compressed natural gas vehicles. I don't know if it was just the shorthand used for the bullet point. I wasn't really clear on the first bullet point under item 1. Does that mean facilitate expanding the number of compressed natural gas vehicles?
Do you want the owners to expand? Right. The point of it is to make it available to more CNG owners.
So
CNG vehicle owners.
is the goal to make the clean natural gas station available to more clean natural gas vehicle owners, or is the goal to expand the number of clean compressed natural gas vehicle owners?
Well, that is the goal.
Both.
Okay.
Yeah,
I guess
well, probably both, right?
Okay, I actually have kind of mixed feelings. I didn't get a chance to go in depth through the UAC comments about this. I don't know if it was discussed there, but I don't think I'm alone in having kind of mixed feelings about whether we really want to encourage more compressed natural gas vehicles in Palo Alto, or if we should really put more of our focus on EVs.
Right, but with the revenue from the LCFS credits that you get from dispensing compressed natural gas, it has to go to the compressed natural gas owners, or to encourage those, or to reduce their cost. And so you can't take the revenues from that and use it for EVs.
Right, I guess
So
I'm wondering.
we're going to get the value of this is much smaller. It was 30,000, maybe with the falling value of the credit, it's only like 25,000. So it's not a whole lot anyway.
So basically, we shouldn't worry about it too much.
It's not going to have a big impact on the market.
You know what, I'll leave that one alone then. Thank you. That's it for my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Councilmember Schmidt, question?
A couple questions, some just to understand. We are selling these credits to someone who does not then have to reduce greenhouse gases.
Right, this is
So,
the cheapest way for them to do it.
right, so it's the cheapest way, but does it mean that our savings that we are achieving by buying electric vehicles doesn't happen in the state? Had no net effect on the state?
Well, they still have to pay, right? And so they're gonna they don't get these for free. So they're trying to make a decision. Should we increase the efficiency over here? Can we? At what cost? Or should we just buy these credits? And maybe that's another reason that the value of the credits has gone down. Maybe people are finding that they can do other things more cheaply than the credit. But at some point, I mean, the fact that they have to buy this for $80 or $100 or whatever it is, rather than $0, adds a cost to these
But that is just passed
high
on
carbon
to their
intensity.
customers. So does a 1 cent, 1/10 of a cent change in the gas price have an impact on greenhouse gases?
Well, if that 1/10 of a 1 cent is used to encourage EVs or CNGs or low carbon intensity fuels, that's the whole point of this program. So, you know, if you question that, you question the intent of the entire program.
Well, yeah.
I mean, it's basically it's
The
kind of like
issue
cap
of
and
allowing
trade in that
someone
way.
to buy out of maintaining a bad practice is, not necessarily a virtue. Okay, that's just a background question. Let me ask questions on your recommended program areas. You have 7 times the amount going to either large rental properties or non-single family homes as going to individuals. So it's a big bias toward these groups.
And you're looking on page 5 of the report, the chart there.
Yes, that's what I'm looking at. Tell me a little bit how this works in an apartment building. Suppose you have an apartment with 10 units and you have 10 parking places. and all the parking places are open, and you have 5 of them having electric vehicles, and they all come back from a long commute at 7 o'clock at night, who gets the charger that you just put in?
That is a tricky one. And that is something that when I talk to property managers is one that I think each community is going to have to figure out. For example, schools, the same thing, the teacher that commutes and they really need to charge to get home. If you look downstairs at our parking garage, those chargers are rarely ever empty. And what I've seen my colleagues do is everyone knows who has an EV. And there is a buddy system where, after their 3 hours is up of charging, they call their colleague or whoever and says, okay, I'm done, and then they'll switch.
Okay, that's at work, we have 8 hours in colleagues.
Right.
When you're in the apartment,
And
after
it's
a long
overnight.
day of work and commuting, does it mean someone goes down there at 1 o'clock in the morning?
Same occurs at our libraries.
Not
I mean, it's
deliver?
going to be an issue
tricky.
that the landlord and the tenants are going to have to
Mhm.
work out.
Yeah.
And if there's a problem like that that persists, I would hope that the landlord would have some sort of incentive to
Yeah,
build more chargers.
We're not going to solve that one here tonight.
right, but the issue is that it's hard to create incentives for EVs if you don't know that you'll be able to take care of it when you get home. Because that's always the worry. Do I have a high enough charge?
Right.
Okay, let me just go to the economics of the deal. But instead of going to the EV buyer, the individual who's laid out the money and can come from any part of the city, it's going instead to apartment owners as an infrastructure issue, is they are getting a subsidy on their infrastructure. And it's a rental property, not an owner property, so it doesn't go to the residents, it goes to the owner, property owner. So why do we have 7 times the subsidy to property owners than to those who are actually buying the EVs? That would seem to me to argue be a real case for let's give it to the people who just laid out money to buy an EV. Why give it to property owners to enhance their infrastructure at no cost?
It really reflects the ability to then leverage that into future purchases. Again, to incent the market, the availability for other users. For a single-family dwelling unit, it really wouldn't be available to anyone else.
Yeah, but that goes back then to, if I'm 1 of 10, can you guarantee me that I can do it before 2 a.m. in the morning?
A future policy discussion for the council will be the charging rate and how to design a rate that creates an incentive to get off the charger after a certain number of hours.
Yeah. But it would seem to me the incentive, the individual incentive would be much stronger if we just write a check. You buy an EV, it sends you a check.
If you could depend on that check, and again, recognizing the volatility of the rebate or the funding source, as we were just describing, if you were immediately making, let's say in the next several weeks or even month, a decision to buy an EV based upon the existence of this program, then perhaps it has that impact. But if you're looking at it as more of a, say, a year or planning a future buy, this program may not be here. So I think the investment or the city's, the utilities decision to make it available at a multifamily dwelling or development makes it more likely to be available for some future user who hasn't either moved in or hasn't purchased the EV.
Okay, but the dynamic of the market right now is every person that has a car does a repurchase, and that repurchase date is ever moving closer. So if you have a clear incentive out there now, it might be enough to tip the balance. for a number of people, and that you get more EVs in town, and that's what we want. Okay,
Right,
that
so
was
the question, how best to incent that?
yeah.
Following question, Councilman Wolbeck.
Just kind of picking up on that, I actually think that you raised a couple interesting, Councilmember Schmidt raises a couple interesting points that kind of relate to each other, which is, you know, one of the reasons why we want to incent the construction and providence of additional chargers throughout the city is so that it's more likely when you come home from work, you're going to find a
Right.
charger at home, or when you go shopping, near where you're going shopping, you'll find a charger there, or if you're working in town and commuting from, say, our neighborhood in Palo Verde, and you work in Sanford Research Park, maybe you commute over there, and again, you're more likely to find a charger there. You know, and all, you know, speaking from personal experience, one of the reasons why I haven't bought an EV myself yet is I'm waiting a couple of years until the charging infrastructure is more robust, and I can more guarantee that I'll be able to plug my bike in when I get to my destination. So, anecdotal, just one personal experience, but I think those two questions really do tie together. So I actually think that the spread is pretty good here. So,
Actually,
Question.
you got a question?
I have a curmudgeon question.
Curmudgeon
Be a
question.
boy.
curmudgeon.
You're not gonna
I
allow
don't,
that,
I,
are you?
I don't see anywhere in the
Get ready
code
for
that
that.
says curmudgeon. But,
Well, Yahweh used to say that, I think, like an auditor, so with that. So, at the state, you know, there's talk of,
this is
excuse
a
me.
question, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes, it is. Charging, you know, a tax on electric vehicles as a part of the registration fee because they don't pay a gas tax anymore, but yet they use the roads. So that's the background for my curmudgeon question here. So right now we have, to use the numbers that's even in this presentation, 1,300 residential vehicles. And that 1,300 cars we're allowing the use of $12,000 worth of city electricity, if I'm understanding this correctly. So if that number of did I understand that right?
Let me.
The
Says
value of
electricity
the
consumed by
electricity.
city-owned smart
Right.
EV chargers.
Those are just the electricity by the city-owned chargers. And so
That's
a lot of
correct.
the EVs are being charged at people's homes.
No, I understand. Yeah, so we're on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
So the city is basically subsidizing
Mm-hmm.
the $12,000 of
Mhm.
electricity. Now, currently, I told you it's a curmudgeon question, so bear with me. So that's what 1,300. If we're looking to go to 2020 to have, you know, whatever the 6%
30,
would
60,
6% would be 2,600. So, you know, let's just say use that number. That's double. That's $24,000 worth. We go out to, you know, 30,000. That's 10 times. So it's $120,000 worth of. So, and let's just pretend, for purpose of the conversation, because we don't know. Let's just suppose that the value of the credits goes away totally. So the city is then subsidizing, I'll just make up a number, $200,000 worth of electricity to EV drivers.
Right. And that, I
So-
mean, that's an issue that we're trying to solve separately. We've been trying to find a way to not have the city EV chargers have it be free, but charge a fee. And so that's separate from this program.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one of the ideas was, let's imagine that we're in the future, a couple of years, and we are charging and not, as you say,
Mhm.
subsidizing and providing this energy for free. One of the ideas was, why don't we make it free or cheaper? And that was one of the ideas. We said, no, that's not a good idea, because I just don't think the incentive is right. If you provide
Mhm.
something for free, people will go and just sort of sip
Mm-hmm.
because it's free and then they're there. And they don't necessarily really need it, and they don't leave the space and the charger open for people who actually do need to charge their car. So you're right, we're subsidizing and providing this for free, and I don't know how long that's going to persist, but that's not the plan to do that
Not
forever.
much longer.
Mhm.
Before we
The plan
bring
is
a
to stop
recommendation
doing
to
that
council.
for the reason that you described, yeah.
And you don't anticipate ATM machines used to be free, and they started charging for them. It was like, that are mad as heck, you know. It's like-
Well, interestingly enough, some of the resident feedback we've gotten maybe curmudgeon feedback was the inability to get on a charger because others are sitting on there. So
Mhm.
you know, we've expected by implementing a charge or fee for charging that, again, to create the incentive
Mhm.
to get off the charger.
So I hope you appreciate the question, and maybe it's not so separate that it shouldn't come to the council to anticipate the question at the council. I won't bring it up again because I brought it
No,
up here.
it's a good
but-
question. and
It is a
it's
good
something
question.
we need to solve,
Yes.
and we've known
Yeah,
about it for a while.
so, okay.
So I have a couple of questions. First one is, so this portfolio, we're going to have so much towards this bucket and so much toward that bucket, sort of, how often does that get adjusted? I mean, and what's the process by which that sort of changes over time?
The program that we're asking you to recommend approval is Attachment A, and that includes the sort of delegating to the city manager how the program would be run with the available dollars annually.
Okay.
And so the city manager
So we'll
would,
look at it
would,
annually.
would adjust these each year as we figure out how much we actually have. And so they'd say, well, this year we have $2 million, let's do whatever, and then the next year
Okay.
we only have 500,000 or whatever. So that's part of the program, is that the city manager will have authority
It's
to
gonna be-
annually
Yeah, it's
review the program. And so what we're kind of
Got it.
showing here is not what you're being asked to approve, but just the sort of initial proposal for the initial year of the program.
Got it, okay. Because the reason I ask is, you know, the amount of money this year is pretty small. I mean, so how big a mistake can we make, right? I mean, right, so, but on the other hand, if it grows over time, then we want to,
2 million,
if
yeah.
if it doesn't get canceled, like you say, right? If it grows and
Mhm.
becomes in the millions of dollars, then something we're going to be more careful with. So, my other question is, what is the intent of the legislation? That is, what kind of guidance have we been given on how to utilize these funds? I mean, obviously, as you pointed out, you're not allowed to take the compressed natural gas ones and use them on EVs, so that's a constraint.
The guidance
Okay.
is on page 3 of the report. Those are the regulations.
What's your interpretation of the intent?
I think the intent is to try to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels by 10% by 2020. This is a program to meet that objective.
I understand that, but they're going to give us, I mean, they're going to allow us to sell these credits. What's their guidance on how we should use the money?
That's on the page 3.
Okay.
And so this is verbatim from the regulations. And this is for the EV. Use all credits to benefit current or future EV customers.
Okay.
Educate the public, so that's why we have that education piece in there,
Yep.
on the benefits of EV transportation. Provide rate options that encourage off-peak charging and minimize adverse impacts to the electric grid. Include an annual compliance reporting. So we have an obligation, because of getting these credits,
Mhm.
to report annually to CARB how we did spend them, how we did spend the revenue.
Mhm.
So we'll have to report, and in fact, one of the other parts of what we're asking council approval for includes a program reporting requirement. So that's basically it, and it's less sort of prescriptive for the natural gas
Mhm.
vehicle revenue, but
Which
it's
is- which is
effectively the same.
Tiny and going to shrink anyway,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I understand.
Okay.
Okay, with that, comments? So we already got all the comments? Councilmember Wolbeck.
I'd like to move the staff recommendation.
Second.
So, I have some comments. So, it seems to me,
Is there a motion on the floor?
there is a motion on the floor.
Has been seconded?
It has been seconded.
Yes,
Okay.
but the maker didn't get a chance to
So,
speak to his
do you
motion.
care to speak to your motion?
I actually think that we've hashed out most of this. I'm happy to, hear the other comments from the chair, but I think that staff seems to have really done their homework, understanding the context of EV use in Palo Alto, doing our best to try and project that for the future, understanding what we're allowed to do under the regulations, and trying to make best use of that for us. So I think it's a sound recommendation. If anyone has friendly amendments, I'd be open to them, but I think it's largely heading in the right direction.
Councilmember Wong, you care to speak your second?
I think the staff's done a good job laying this out, curmudgeon factor aside. So, and I think you said that it's not like we're risking a whole lot here.
Greg, you want to comment?
I'd like to hear your comments. I have no extra comment.
Okay. So, it seems to me, given their guidance, that the high-level use of this kind of funds kind of falls into three buckets. It seems to be sensible to me. One is, because the intent is to proliferate EV usage, right? I mean, just speaking about the EV, not the CNG, right? And so, one kind of investment we can make with it is to help the city offset the cost of investing in the EV infrastructure to support that kind of mobility, right? Which I think makes sense.
Mhm.
There's a second bucket which is to the benefit of existing EV owners. And there's a third bucket which is to the benefit of future EV owners. As people who haven't bought one yet, but might buy one in the future. And there's a fourth bucket, actually, which is EV drivers that aren't from Palo Alto. Because if I look at how we get it, it's attached to the fact that there are EV drivers in Palo Alto. And so,
Living in Palo
Alto, and it's coming in because of that.
Or that's dispensed by the city-owned.
Or that's dispensed by the city-owned,
Mhm.
right, correct. So, the argument that it shouldn't go to existing EV owners because they already made their decision.
Mhm.
I'm troubled by that argument, okay? At least some of it shouldn't go there, right? Because, let's say Karen owns an EV. So we're going to get $200, $232, right, this year because Karen bought an EV. Right? And so if we take the $230 that's coming in because of Karen, and we give it to Greg to buy an EV,
Right.
then we're basically, it seems off to me, okay? That it seems like a transfer, okay? I mean, it's not actually what that is, right? But it sort of seems that way. So it seems to me that Karen ought to get some of it, right? Now, city investing in EV infrastructure benefits everybody, so that one's easy, okay? City providing incentives to future EV customers, that seems to be consistent with the intent of the program, right? And what they want to do, and governments have the right to tax and distribute it and so forth. But again, step aside for a second, all this a caveat. The numbers in here are so small anyway that how much engineering does it make sense to do, right? But then one other category is people that don't live in Palo Alto, right, but drive their EVs in and charge. And so to me, that's another reason why the city shouldn't give out free electricity at city-owned charging stations, because the vast majority of those are going to go to people that commute in, right? Because your data shows that 80% of EV charging is done by people, at their home,
Mhm.
right? Which is how I do it, right? I mean, I've owned an EV for 8 years, and I think I've charged it less than 4 times, okay, at some other place. So it seems to me that those 3 buckets ought to guide our thinking in how to spend the money, right?
Mhm.
And so, for example, to offset the cost of installing EV charging facilities in apartment buildings. That sort of makes sense to me, okay, because they're going to be used by Palo Alto residents, okay, because it's people that live in there, it's not people that drive from San Jose and so forth. And it goes towards maybe some of the, maybe existing EV owners, although if there's not a charging station at your apartment building, you probably don't have an EV, right? Cause
Or you may be in Greg's situation where you got to fight with your neighbors.
or you might be in it, yeah.
Right.
If there's only one, if there's only one, you gotta queue up at 3 o'clock in the morning or something.
Be a good neighbor.
So none of this is to reject Councilmember Wolbach's motion, which I'm going to support too. But I think as we go forward, we ought to be thinking about that. That some of it should go, I mean, having this funding city infrastructure expansion EV makes a lot of sense, and a lot of it should go there. I think some of it needs to go back to existing EV owners. So to the extent there's programs that benefit existing EV owners and future EV owners together, like reducing the cost of charging at night, okay, and I saw that, I thought, boy, that makes a lot of sense now, but what about in 2024, when 35% of our electricity comes, from solar, and it only shows up in the nighttime? Maybe we want people to charge in the daytime, right? I don't know. But so that kind of makes sense, right? But if you went through that filter again, and it would line up with yours, that free electricity at city EV chargers probably doesn't rank high on the priority. And the other thing that I looked at this and I think it makes sense is that we should spend a little bit on education outreach, but I would hate to see us spending millions of dollars on education outreach, because my sense is people in Palo Alto, they're not going to be influenced by too much of this kind of stuff, right? So but they may be influenced by apartment buildings with chargers and so forth. So that would be my 2 bits on that. Sure.
I did have one question, and really good comments, and I want my $252. But I did have a question.
32.
Is 32, I'm sorry. But I did have one question I neglected to ask is, are we talking about apartment buildings that are new construction, or how feasible is it to retrofit?
Right.
And this is just retrofits, because the building codes.
It's just retrofits.
Yeah, because
Okay.
building codes today say if it's a new
Oh, that's
building,
right.
it has
That's
to
right.
have EV
That's right.
charging.
Of course.
So in that case, they do not qualify for the rebate. This is just for existing buildings that do not have any.
I knew
EV
that. Thank you for the
charging.
reminder. I knew that.
Um,
That makes sense.
that's-
Okay.
Thanks.
Yes, that was
Good.
some of my comments. Programs that benefit all EV owners are preferable to ones that just benefit new ones, like paying them to install chargers. Because Karen had to install a charger too, and she's getting some of that credit because she installed a charger. Sorry, go ahead. Councilmember Schmidt.
I thought Eric made some great points. There are 2 qualifications I'd add, is that the early users of EVs already have their reward for being smarter than anyone else.
But
And
they're
the
the
best-
ones
Being
bringing,
right
but
is
they're
its
the
own
ones bringing
reward.
in the revenue.
And the best
They're the
ones-
ones bringing in the revenue.
The best way to build an infrastructure is to increase the number of EV users. Therefore, I propose an amendment to the motion that the majority, half the funds, go to rebates, at least half the funds go to rebates to new buyers.
Rebates too.
To new buyers?
New buyers.
Yeah, I'll-
New buyers only?
I will not accept that as a friendly amendment.
Just food for thought. There's also a request by early adopters that places in public spaces, like certain churches and buildings, that put in EV chargers that are free to the public, that have been there for a while, that they should get something. And so there are a lot of groups that could potentially get some of the funds. But
Yeah, I don't,
I had another comment on the giving to existing EV owners. We don't know who these owners are, and we know from that the number But the administrative issue with trying to find out who they are, whether they still own it,
Right.
and then, having them to come forward and register, and how many of them are going to do that. And it turned out it was actually fairly expensive to give the money away. And it didn't feel like a very good use of the money. And then if you did an annual amount, because we get the money annually based on the value of whatever we sell it for, then you have to continue to check with them. Do you still own that card? And a lot of them don't necessarily want you to know that they own it or where they live and all that stuff. And they may not be a utility customer. So it's a different type of relationship we would have with them. And it turned out to be, just thinking through it, it felt like, wow, that is probably not worth it.
I'm not surprised
So
by
thank you
that.
very much for that. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, I don't mean to sort of argue that specifically, literally, the city should start sending out checks to existing owners. I think we should weigh the administrative efficiency into all this stuff as well. Only that the principle that, the existing owners did what they did because what they did, and they should be out of the equation. I think I find that problematic. I think they should benefit. I think we should design programs that benefit all EV owners, right? So I didn't mean to sort of say literally the city should write a check. So I hope that was clear. Councilmember Wolder.
Yeah, just a couple of comments inspired by the comments I've just heard from my colleagues. The kind of the fourth bucket of that was identified by Chair Philseth, helping or providing, some kind of service or spending this in a way which benefits EV users who do not live in Palo Alto. I would actually not argue that we should eliminate or limit that bucket. I actually think that's a tremendously important bucket, as it is exceedingly difficult for people to live in Palo Alto, and it's not likely to become easier for those people to become Palo Alto residents anytime soon. Yet they do have to commute to Palo Alto for their jobs, and given not just Palo Alto but regional housing costs, sometimes those commutes are stretching further and further and further away. In order for them to have a successful commute without severe range anxiety or really pushing beyond the range capabilities of EVs, having a place for them to charge when they get to their job or come to Palo Alto to spend their money and help our sales tax base, when they come to Palo Alto, for them to have a place to charge, even if whether it's for a couple hours while they're shopping here or having dinner in downtown, or when they're at work here before they go home to whatever community they live in. I think that is important and pursues the goal of Palo Alto, not just the state goal, which is to make it easier and thus encourage people to buy EVs and to use EVs, but also pursues our goal of being a green city, as was mentioned earlier. The lion's share, the big opportunity for us to reduce our net greenhouse gas is in transportation, and considering that we can't just think about the greenhouse gas impacts of Palo Alto residents. We have to think about the greenhouse gas impacts of Palo Alto. And that includes the car trips that we facilitate, encourage, require by having people come to and from Palo Alto from other communities. And so I just wanted to emphasize, it doesn't sound like we're going to have a debate about it as motions tonight, but if it does come to future decision making by the city manager or comes back to the council, it sounds like there might be some. My preference would be to make sure that group is not left out of the equation. So.
I actually think that's a separate discussion, and maybe a valuable discussion in its own right. But it's really an issue of to what extent does the city of Palo Alto want to invest in regional stuff, right? That is, the city of Palo Alto, for example, could say, we're going to take 1% of revenues and put it into regional emissions reductions, right? And it's going to be, we're going to provide charging stations for people to drive in, and we're going to provide charging stations, and we're going to help fund charging stations in San Jose and Cupertino and, you know, other places too. It's a regional action kind of thing, and I think that's potentially, you know, it's a worthwhile discussion. But I think what you're describing, sort of fits on that axis, not specifically this one. Right?
What I'm talking about is
Because you can make the same argument, you know, people work in San Jose. I mean, maybe we should, maybe we should subsidize park space in San Jose because they live in San Jose, right? But they work in Palo Alto, and so, you know, we have an obligation to help them with their life. You can make the argument, right? And it seems to me the same kind of argument, but it's, like you said, it's not material to the motion tonight. I thought on what to do about this, the discretion of the city manager on an annual basis made sense. Further comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you, Jane. And you too, of course.
I'll see you later.
And
Let's see,
Elvis.
if I could make a comment, I found it very helpful that the UAC minutes are more detailed than traditionally they have been. Makes a world of difference to be able to see the spread of perspectives and points of view from the UAC.
Okay, with that, the next item is future agendas.
Future agendas. So we have a limited number of meetings, and I'll give an explanation as we go by the calendar here. And there's some modifications that I'm going to read that are not listed, so I apologize for that, but those were happened after the printing of the current agenda. As you know, it's a couple of weeks in advance. The 10-4 meeting was canceled because council is meeting that night now, and so we were asked to for that night for your use as a council.
Why is that? I don't remember.
The third is a religious holiday, if I remember correctly. Yeah. The 18th then will be our next meeting where we do have agenda items. We're going to bring to you the CNG portfolio, and we're going to bring you reappropriations. The reappropriations, just to remind you, these are items where staff was not able to award a contract but has had a budget assigned to specific projects. So we bring you a list of all the specific items that we want to reappropriate, and you take a look and review and either give us approval or not. Then the 1st of November is not listed there, and that's just an omission. We do not have any items as of yet for that night, but we still have it open. Then we move on to the 15th of November, and that is an important night because we come to you with the year-end financials. So the external auditor comes here that night from MGO, and David Bullock, and then our internal auditor, and they present to you the findings of the audit, and then staff presents to you the CAFR and the year-end financials and our financial position, and we will discuss that with you. One change, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Before you leave that one, is there any update on when we might get our copies of the final budgets?
Yes, we are shooting for the end of the month, which is coming up here pretty quickly. the good news is we're up to 5 instead of 3 now. We've hired 2 more staff members at OMB. And so that's the reason for the delay, that we just don't have a full team. But we're trying to get that out because we recognize it's an important document and it's election year as well. So we're trying to get that out as fast as we can. Thank you for the reminder. So the item number 4 listed there on the 11/15th, we're going to move out. And here's the reason for moving it out. We're going to move it out to the December 6th date. I think it'll be important for us to really vet out some of these items that we'll present to you. Second, I think it'll be important for you to understand where our financial position is and think about it and have some time to reflect versus giving you the numbers and then giving you 18 right away. You may have additional questions or suggestions of things that you want to hear or see in regards to 16th. And so we're going to do that. And then the third reason, which it's more to my timing, I want to have the latest numbers on property tax and sales tax. And I think those are key. And so, that's probably number 1, but it's more.
I need to ask you something about that. Okay.
And so those are the drivers for moving that out.
In relation to that,
Yes.
I mean, that's usually about the time we start looking at long-range financial forecasts and so forth. How do you see that sort of meshing into this?
And just to remind the committee, we were very transparent with you that due to the
Your gigantic staff.
yes, and the effort to try to give you a preliminary balancing outline, we weren't going to be able to do a full-blown long-range financial forecast. What we are going to do is look out at a 3-year window, and even though we may not produce the beautiful full layout, we are going to give you an update of what we think the next 3 years will be, because we think that that's important as we're laying out some of these options.
So that will be in the December 6th meeting.
Yeah, we're gonna. That's why we're trying to see these key revenues come in, because as you may recall, your property taxes are due, December 10th. Most people end up paying early, so we'll get a good indication of how things are.
You're talking about item 4 on the.
I'm sorry. Yes, I am.
Is there a meeting scheduled for December 18th?
So right now you're officially on vacation that week. So my comment to you is that staff, recognizes that there may be a need to have an additional meeting. So we could, look for something that works for staff and the committee if we needed to have a second meeting in December.
What was the date you were talking about for December?
The first Tuesday, which is December 6th.
So you're taking moving item 4 to December 6th?
That's correct. So December 6th is your regularly scheduled meeting right now.
Right.
And the third Tuesday of the month, which is your second scheduled one, it lands on your holiday vacation.
But possibly the 13th would be open.
We would have to look at dates as we get closer. We can work on that and look at that. But you might want to, as a committee, start thinking about that and looking at dates, and so then we can look as well. Go ahead. Sorry.
Actually, why don't you finish? I was going to ask about, Greg asked a question earlier this evening on in-lieu parking and stuff like that.
Yeah, in terms of in-lieu parking, let me commit to this, that I'll go back and find out what we have. Cara whispered to me as she was leaving that some of these items are going to PTC first. Okay. And so what I can do is give an update as to where things are and let you know what the timeline. If it's going through PTC, I don't know the timing, but I could see it challenging to meet some of these deadlines to come to this committee, but let me verify that information.
Okay, super.
That's all I had.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Other
So
comments?
it doesn't include when the penalties are going to come. Or we know, or I think Cara said she didn't know if that was going to go to full council or finance first.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that too.
Very good. And with nothing else further on the agenda, unless anybody has anything else, let's adjourn the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you guys again.
Yeah, Mike was.
It's been so long. I said, oh yeah, that guy.
Ed, can I- Fifth item on the finance committee.
Strong
Agenda.
resolution. Okay.